yeah, my planned reboot of the channel went about as well as you expect. You make a few videos and then it goes back to how it used to be, where you get like one video a month. Sorry. But yes, welcome back to another video, and of course, you've read the title, it's the February film ranking.
We're coming down to the ground. There's no better place to go. We got snow upon the mountains. We got rivers down.
Because while in these, parts of the year, sometimes there won't be many videos coming out, and it's purely because of like university work, life gets in the way, and I've been incredibly busy the past month. I always make sure to at least get the monthly film ranking. It just adds that bit of consistency to the channel, and I want to bring it back properly. I want to, so that's why I'm doing it. And also, of course, to get to talk about all the different films I've watched. But this month, there's been a lot less than there was in January. It's been a lot quieter on the movie front. There's only been 11 films I've seen this month, and I've got to say it's a real mixed bag, to be honest. Because yes, there are some classic films on this list, one or two real gems, and there's a couple of the awards films this award season that I've got on the list as well, but it is a real mixed bag of quality. It doesn't particularly sway one way or the other. It's very varied and whatnot. And whilst that does make for arguably a more interesting list than just me praising everything to the high heavens, it will be a while until we get to that, so just be warned. So let's get cracking, starting at the bottom with a film that, ironically, I have basically no opinions on. To All the Boys, P.S. I Still Love You. It's the second of the To All the Boys I loved before series. These are films that I really just do not care for. They're not my thing at all, but I've got the first one a little bit higher, so we'll talk about that kind of more broadly. But yeah, this sequel did absolutely nothing for me. It was, for me, just complete background noise. The only remotely noteworthy thing that I got from this is the opening tried to homage Adventures in Babysitting, which I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. And then they have to do the annoying thing where they draw attention to the fact they're homaging something. It's like, just let the moment sit, please. But yeah, this is a film I just have no opinions on, and it's just crap. It's just not my thing whatsoever. Now, for a little break before we get to the other To All the Boys film, we have Ballistic, Ecks versus Sever, which is often cited as the worst movie ever made, according to sites like Rotten Tomatoes. It has often garnered that title. And I think if it didn't have that title, it would be just completely forgotten, because ultimately this film is a pretty generic, substandard, early 2000s action movie, but it's not the worst thing ever made, come on. Again, the plot doesn't make any sense, especially the whole nanobot stuff. Antonio Banderas and Lucy Liu should elevate this film, but they're fine. The music is very early 2000s, a bit distracting at points. The editing, again, very of that era, so again, a bit distracting. But it doesn't do anything offensively bad, and there's some solid action set pieces and stunt work and practical effects. It's nice to see, especially in an era where CGI kind of dominated, especially this era, quite crude CGI. Nice to see some of these practical effects. And I think knowing the troubled production of the film, and obviously its, title of the worst movie ever made, I'm probably a bit kinder to it than I probably ordinarily would be, but it's still not a great film. I would highly recommend checking out the Unusual Suspects video about this film and its troubled production, because that does give you a lot of insight into how this film came about, and you feel bad for people like the director who are basically just shafted by the studio. But yeah, overall, the final product, it ain't great, but it has a charm to it. Okay, coming in at number 9, we have the other To All the Boys I Loved Before, the first one. Again, these films just are not my cup of tea. It's that really generic, cheesy, high school teen romance sort of stuff that I just don't care for and can't pretend to care for. I was watching these films with a friend, and yes, she loves them, I don't. It's as simple as, but yeah, they're just not my thing. It's just that kind of genre and style and vibe that I don't care for. You've got all the classic tropes, you've got the cheesy dialogue, the very predictable story beats and whatnot. The filmmaking as well, it's a Netflix film, so it does feel a bit workmanlike and a bit bog standard at points. There are some weird, funky edits at certain points in the film, and I can't really tell if that's creative or if it feels distracting, but that's something at least. It's not, it's not offensively bad or anything, it's just not my kind of film whatsoever. Brave is one of the Pixar films that I never actually got around to watching until now, and it's definitely one of the studio's weaker films. This is another film that absolutely had a troubled production, and you can definitely see, you can really tell the conflicting visions of Brenda Chapman, who was originally directing. You can tell those ideas of, this woman trying to defy the odds in this male-dominated era of Scotland, and I think when the film focuses on that, I think there's some compelling stuff there. But she was fired halfway through, and then they got another guy, and those clashing visions are so apparent, and it really is very flip-floppy. Tonally, really clashes, you know. It's trying to go for a bit more of a serious, moody, grounded sort of story, you know, more, you know, less sort of fantastical and whimsical like some other Pixar films can be. But then you've also got some incredibly childish humour. Animation-wise, I'm not too big on the look of the film. Some scenes look really good, like, you know, sort of stuff in the dark when it's nighttime and it's quite moody. I think some of that is quite effective. And, you know, in the woods, all the mist and whatnot. But then some of the daytime stuff just looks really overlit, and I can't lie, it looks a bit ugly, and it's not held up particularly well. And there's plenty of plot contrivances, and the whole kind of arc of Merida just isn't... It could have been a lot more than what it was, and I really just don't think it's fully realised, which is a shame. Like, it's not a flat-out terrible film, it has some great moments in it. The bit where she shoots the arrow through the arrow is brilliant. I love that moment, and there's some great moments spliced throughout, but overall, it really doesn't live up to its potential. Frozen 2 is a similar kind of thing to Brave in that I feel it's a very ambitious film that, through another trouble production, that's become a bit of a theme on this list, but through a very chaotic production that is very obvious to see in the script and the narrative, you get a film that, again, really doesn't fulfill its ambitions that it sets out to achieve. That's why I rate these couple of films a little bit higher on the list, because I do respect having that ambition. And with Frozen, for example, I really do see that ambition of wanting to expand the world and the lore of the Frozen world, you know, really exploring the past of Arendelle. I forgot what the other people are called. I bloody forgot what they're called. But I enjoyed, you know, exploring the different sides of it, you know. Stuff with, like, the voices calling out to Elsa, you know, the kind of, that mystery element. They're really trying to build this, you know, grand scope with this kind of story, and I do appreciate that, but it really doesn't come together very well. From a plot and character level, it really just doesn't come together. Like, the characters, again, Elsa and Anna feel like they're just repeating the same arc from the first film. It really doesn't feel like it feels like they just reset where they were so they can have this another story, and it just doesn't make any sense. Like, you continue the story, you don't regress it. Characters like Kristoff and Olaf, they just get shafted, and they get barely anything to do for large chunks of the film. And plot-wise as well, you know, you kind of think there's going to be some real kind of stakes for Arendelle. You think one of them's going to get killed off. You think that, you know, things are really going to change, the status quo is really going to change, and in the end, it just doesn't, which is sort of feels like a bit of a cop-out. It ultimately just feels like, why did we build up the fact that, you know, these characters might have to face up against the sins of the past and whatnot if you're not gonna change the status quo and have them move forward and evolve? It just doesn't... It feels very cheap and a bit of a cop-out. Like I say, I do think there are some individually great moments here and there, and I think overall the aesthetic, whether it's the gorgeous animation, the great songs like Into the Unknown and Kristoff's ballad, that's awesome. I think that's why I've put it above Brave, because I think aesthetically I do really like this film, and it has similar pros but also similar cons, but it just, I just get a bit more out of Frozen 2. Hero, the 2002 Chinese martial arts film, is another film that aesthetically is gorgeous. The cinematography, the composition, the colours really do pop, and it's such a vibrant looking film, and I love the approach that the director took with this film, and it's that kind of style which you see in films like this, films like House of Flying Daggers. I think it's the same director as that film, but I really do love the aesthetic of it, and it is gorgeous, and that is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, frankly, because the story and characters I really didn't much connect with. I feel like this, in this case, is less of the film actually doing stuff wrong, although I think it could have been a lot more developed. It does feel a bit stock at points, but I think it's more so maybe me and less so faults of the writing and the production. But yeah, I just didn't fully click with the film, and I think it did feel a bit sour of substance for me at times. But ultimately, I've given it this sort of middling to good score, because overall I think it may have just been me, and when I watched it, I wasn't fully in the right headspace to watch it, so I may give it another go, but overall, it does ring a bit style over substance for me, and it just wasn't the best. Although, stylistically, the film is fantastic and pretty much flawless, so I can't knock that. Except for the weird Chinese and Eastern martial arts movies in terms of their approach to not having physics in any of the action scenes, because here it throws me off. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, it throws me off, and it's bloody confusing, and I don't know. It's maybe just, I think it's just a vibe and a style that I don't fully click with. Hamnet is one of the films up for Best Picture this year, and it's one of the big kind of front runners in the awards race this season, particularly for its acting from Jessie Buckley and Paul Mescal. That I completely understand, because those two are phenomenal. Jessie Buckley in particular really does steal the show, and she is phenomenal. All the accolades she's gotten, absolutely deserve it. And ultimately, it is a relatively simple film, and it is a bit of a slow burn, and it is exploring the grief of William Shakespeare and his wife Agnes, and over the loss of their son, which ultimately inspires the creation of Shakespeare's Hamlet. And yeah, it is a slow burn, so I think you're never going to get the most out of it on first watch. But I think it's solid. Like I said, the acting is superb, and the raw emotions in certain scenes really does stick with you. I think the cinematography is solid. The production design is really great. The sort of medieval Tudor era England. It's a cool aesthetic, and they recreate that very well. However, I think the final act of the film is really what will decide people's opinions on it, and it can either elevate it or detract it. And for me, it detracted from it because I felt like the ending where Hamlet is finally staged and Agnes goes to watch it, and it's the moment for me where she reaches out and then all the rest of the crowd reach out, realizing how William Shakespeare, he has put the grief of losing his son into his work. That is what's fueled it, and it's her realizing that. And look, I get what the film is going for. I get what it's trying to say and explore. But understanding a film and feeling the emotions of that film are two different things, and this proves it for me. I think it really is that part where the whole crowd started reaching out, and just it's this overhead shot where you see everybody and the music starts swelling, and it's just really overwrought and cheesy, and I feel like it feels quite cheap and just it's a bit too try hard to try and get that emotional response out of the audience, and it doesn't really earn it, in my opinion. But at the same time, I do understand why for some people that would work. I do get why some people really love it, and I get why for the ending it really elevated the experience for some people. But personally for me, it just kind of ended on a bit of a damp squib. Train Dreams is another film that is part of the Best Picture awards race this season, and it kind of similar to Hamlet. They are both quite slow burn films and very much character pieces on their particular characters and their lives, and it explores their grief and whatnot. However, I really connected with Train Dreams a lot more than Hamlet. I felt it was less, not pretentious, but I felt the emotions felt more earned and natural, as opposed to Hamlet, where they could sometimes feel a bit forced to me. First of all, the cinematography of this is probably the best all year. I know I've kind of praised one battle after another's cinematography, and while I don't retract what I've said about that, I think it would be nice to see Train Dreams win the Oscar for Best Cinematography, because my god, this is stunning. The aspect ratio, the way it captures these natural landscapes and sunsets and fires and everything, it looks absolutely stunning. There's a nice rotating ensemble of actors throughout the film, but it's mainly helmed by Joel Edgerton, who is a great actor, and he gives a great understated performance, but you really see and feel all of his grief and all of his emotions over this long period of time. You see his life in the simple moments, and you see it at the backdrop of all this change in America during the early 20th century. You see the world pass him by. And I don't know, I just feel like the simplicity of that, it rang more true to me, and I could really connect with that a lot more. It's always like the midpoint of the film, something happens, which I won't spoil because I do encourage you to watch it, but something happens where the tone shifts and it's a lot more, it's a very shocking moment, but it's a lot darker, and the grief of what happens, it dawns on him, and it becomes really powerful, because I think it contrasts with the quite peaceful nature of the start of the film, and I think it just works, and I really got into it, and I was nervous that the film was going to come across a bit Oscar-baity, but I didn't feel that in the end, which I'm happy to report. So in my experience, the Blair Witch Project is a bit of a Marmite film. Some people love it, and it has become a classic in the years since its release. But there are plenty of people who equally really hate the film, and not just from it was too scary, but from a very much, they don't enjoy the style, they find it quite gimmicky and cheap. Often the acting has been quite heavily slated in the years since, and it even got a Razzie nomination for worst film at the Golden Raspberries, and I have to respectfully disagree with the hate, because I genuinely do think that this film holds up so well, and it is, even nearly 30 years on, it is still scary. And this film is very much the gold standard of the found footage subgenre of horror, and I think it works just incredibly well. Obviously it's not perfect, I think, by its very nature. It can occasionally be a bit meandering at points, but it is still such an innovative way to tell a story, and especially at this time in the 90s when home videos were still relatively new. Filming stuff, it wasn't as commonplace as it is nowadays. And I just think the way that they're able to construct this story out of it, the way that the characters are film students who are making this documentary and trying to uncover the truth of the Blair Witch and how it cost them everything. I think it really lends itself to some great character work. So with Heather particularly, who is so passionate about making this documentary, getting all this footage, discovering all this at the cost of everything, ultimately, I think that's a really effective, and ultimately her confession towards the end of the film is such a disturbing moment of realization for her, And that arguably is much more of a disturbing thought than any jump scare. And for me, it's one of the ultimate examples of what you don't see. Because ultimately, yeah, you don't see a monster, you don't see the Blair Witch, that would be shit. That would be really crap. Because it was a minuscule budget film. But it's all that implied horror. It's just so many little details that just unsettle you, and it's the perfect example of less is more. By not showing you that is far more scary than any effects and creature design that a film could show you. Just it leaves it to your imagination, and you fill in the blanks, and you come up with something absolutely disturbing. And the final sequence of the film and that final shot is bone chilling. And watching this at like midnight on a Thursday night when it's raining. Yeah, I had to have the lights on that night. Another 90s classic at number 2, we have A Few Good Men from the late great Rob Reiner, who, my God, he just proved that, throughout the 80s and 90s, he had an incredible streak of films. You had This Is Spinal Tap, Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, and Hamnet selling Misery, and it ends this fantastic streak with A Few Good Men, one of the best courtroom dramas that there's ever been. While I was excited to watch this film, I was also a bit apprehensive because I had a feeling that, I might find it a bit stuffy and a bit boring because it is a legal courtroom drama and it's not particularly the most flashy of premises and whatnot. But the script from Aaron Sorkin of The Social Network, his script is fantastic. The dialogue is brilliant. It's so snappy. It's so sparkly. There's some great humour throughout, which gives it a lot of life and character and makes what could have been a pretty dull and dreary film really come to life. But I think you've also got to attribute some of that to Rob Reiner, the way he directs it, the way he managed to maintain a constant sense of pace, a constant sense of energy, a constant sense of raising tension and escalating stakes. I'm not saying that the film is rushed or anything. It's not sort of made for low attention spans exactly, but it's never dull. Even in the quieter moments, there's still that constant pace, those constant underlying stakes of the situation. And it's phenomenally acted as well from Tom Cruise, Demi Moore, Jack Nicholson, who is in it far less than I would have thought, considering his second build in the credits, but my God, he makes a lasting impression. And it all culminates in that iconic final showdown with Cruise and Nicholson, with the "you can't handle the truth," which everybody knows that line. Everybody knows that line. It is synonymous in pop culture, but there is a reason why that whole scene has become iconic in the years since, because it really is just the stuff of magic. It's just fantastically done. From a writing, acting, production, direction standpoint, it's all just there, and it just makes for a true classic. And at number 1, we have what I would cite as my favourite Pixar movie now, WALL-E. I haven't watched this film since obviously before we were watching it. I hadn't watched it in 7 years, I think. I hadn't watched it since I was a kid, and I always loved it. I always remember loving it. I remember crying towards the end when WALL-E was, when we thought he was going to die at the end, he was going to, and had his memory wiped and all that sort of stuff. It always left a lasting impression on me as a kid. And then when I got more into film and I realised how the production of this film, the inspirations that it took from the likes of 2001: A Space Odyssey, even Buster Keaton films to do like wordless storytelling, even as like a 12-year-old watching this, I was still engaged despite the lack of dialogue. I think as well, having watched now Hello Dolly, which obviously WALL-E is watching on the TV in his little collection, I get those references of the songs that he's watching. I get that more now, which is nice to have. But it is just a phenomenally told story about a dystopian future. Its environmental stuff is brilliantly done and not heavy-handed, and it shows the impact of how far humanity could go in the wrong direction. And that always really disturbed me as a kid. How humans have become morbidly obese. They're on these hover chairs. They can't stand back up on their own. They can't do these things. It always sort of struck a nerve with me as a kid, and it still holds up, arguably, depressingly, better now than it did back in 2008. With how over-reliant we are on technology, it's becoming far more commonplace and we become more complacent. But it still remains optimistic about that we can make a better future, ultimately showing the good that exists in the world, with WALL-E's collection of all the nice things that make being human, with the plant that he treasures, with his love for Eve, the fact that two robots can have just the best chemistry in the world. It is such an endearing romance. I love the captain as a character. I think he's such a great character. To see him finally take a stand and think for himself for the first time in God knows how long. I even think Otto works as a good contrast to WALL-E and Eve. And I know people have said he's a bit of a bland villain, but I think it works. He doesn't need to be any more than he is. I think he just suits the story well. The animation is also absolutely stunning, and it still holds up nearly 20 years on, but also just the general direction of the film, the shots, the composition, the colours, it just, as I say, the wordless storytelling, it all goes to just create what is just a phenomenal film. And for me, I think probably is the Pixar film that I would say is my favourite. You know, I've always loved sci-fi with Star Wars and Doctor Who. I'm a sucker for a good romance sort of story, you know, especially nowadays. And I also do enjoy films with that kind of wordless storytelling. You know, stuff like Buster Keaton films, as the film kind of was inspired by. It really, just for me, is everything I can want in a Pixar film, and it really speaks to my taste the most of any of their work. And that's why it gets the #1 spot on this list. And what do we think could beat it in the year? I don't know, but we'll have to see. And that's my very mixed list, so I hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know what you've watched in February, and also what you think of any of these films. And, you know, if you like some of the ones near the bottom, let me know, and, you know, let me know what your favourites on this list are, just, you know, all that good stuff. And until next time, you take care and have a great day.